Chapter 35. My Moonshot, Going Abroad, 1989 to 1991. When I entered the magnificent halls of the Shanghai municipal government in 1981, a subtle realization stirred in my subconscious. One I couldn't fully grasp or articulate at the time, yet it would profoundly shape my future in unexpected ways. China faced a vast divide, one that seemed nearly unbridgeable. It was the separation between the powerful and the powerless. You were either among those in power or among the governed. There was no in-between. Once you joined the ruling elite, it became exceedingly difficult to genuinely consider the people's needs. Frequently, the interests of the powerful clashed with those they ruled, often standing in stark opposition. At the time, I was still young and ambitious and believed in the possibility of reform within the system. I was eager to prove myself, to rise through the ranks, and maybe, just maybe, to make a difference. But 1989 shattered those illusions forever. In 1988, Shanghai Hengshan Group was founded as a government entity posing as a corporate enterprise, emerging from the reception office and municipal reception bureau. Essentially, it was a structured means to channel government influence for the personal benefit of the high-ranking officials. I was one of the founders from the start, drafting the group's corporate charter, overseeing all legal processes, and establishing the basis for what became Shanghai's leading enterprise at the time, and possibly the top in all of China. It was built upon a core of power and privilege. Honorary Chairman, Jiang Zemin, Mayor of Shanghai. Chairman, Secretary General of the Municipal Government. General Manager, Director of the Municipal Reception Office. Office Director, me. Previously, personal profit in the government depended on individual relationships, a network of secretive favors, hushed agreements, and discreet benefits. This behavior was eventually denounced as a blatant misuse of power. But now, political interests and financial gains were transmitted and traded transparently and directly through corporate channels. What was once labeled as a backdoor deal or pulling strings had transformed into legitimate business. This marked the emergence of the new trend in the so-called economic reform. Even as I found myself at the heart of power and affluence, I was painfully aware of its perils, how it tarnished everything it encountered, and deepened the chasm between the ruling elite and the populace they claimed to represent. Despite spending years navigating this system, I felt like a fraud and outsider yearning for something deeper, something just. In 1987, when mass student protests in Beijing led to the ousting of General Secretary Hu Yaobang, I could no longer stay quiet. Resembling my actions from kindergarten, I decided to reach out again. This time, I composed a heartfelt letter to Deng Xiaoping, emphasizing the urgent need for political reform. By 1989, the call for reform had reached its breaking point. Hu Yaobang's death ignited an unprecedented wave of protest. From the universities in Beijing, students poured into Tiananmen Square, launching the most significant student movement in Chinese history. Their cries for freedom, democracy, and reform echoed throughout the nation, sparking a movement unlike anything China had ever seen. People from all walks of life, workers, teachers, intellectuals, journalists, joined in. For the first time, it felt as though change was truly possible. In Shanghai, I followed every development in Beijing, watching the protests unfold in real time. Chuling and I even joined the demonstrations at People's Square in Shanghai, swept up in the fervor of a moment that felt like history in the making. But then, the crackdown began. Martial law was imposed. The People's Liberation Army, of which I was once a member, moved into Beijing with tanks and armored units. The soldiers who had previously been trained to defend the populace, or so they stated, were now directing their weapons at them. The government unleashed terror on its own students, the nation's brightest, most hopeful, and most courageous young minds. They were unarmed, peaceful, and the future of China. And then, on June 4th, 1989, the gunfire began. The moment I heard it, I knew. I knew that the China I had believed in all my life was gone. I knew the party I once served had chosen terror over truth. I knew that everything I had spent my life working for, every dream I had dared to hold, had just been obliterated in a hail of bullets. This was no longer politics. This was a massacre. There was no turning back now. There was no pretending I could remain part of the system. At that moment, as the echoes of gunfire rang through the streets of Beijing, I felt something inside me break. My faith, my loyalty, my belief in the system, and I knew I had to sever ties with the party, the driving force behind everything. I knew my life would change forever. The world I'd believed in, the system I'd served, and the party I'd once pledged my loyalty to were all lies. The illusions had vanished. The propaganda lay in shards. And so, we return to that moment at the beginning of this book. My world collapsed. My universe crumbled. My once brilliant political future was destroyed. I, a Communist Party member, a People's Liberation Army veteran, a government official and insider, I made my decision. I would break away. I would sever ties with the party and the military once and for all. Even if it meant jail or death, so be it. Determination is a curious force, elusive and unpredictable. At times it surges like a sudden spark, striking flint against steel, igniting a blaze that devours hesitation and fear in its relentless heat. At other times it flows like a quiet undercurrent, subtle, almost imperceptible, running so deep beneath the surface that you scarcely notice its pull until, one day, you look back and see it has carried you across vast distances, farther than you ever dreamed possible. It was a game changer when Director Hu suggested that I leave the country. For me, leaving China represented more than just a decision. It was a profound reckoning, a clash between determination and reality that had accumulated over the years. I wasn't escaping. I wasn't forced into exile by fear or hopelessness. Instead, I embraced exile as a bold act of defiance, standing against Deng and his communist allies, reminiscent of the rebellious spirit I first displayed in kindergarten. Yet this time, the stakes were far more serious. This was life or death for real. I committed myself to this choice, plunging into the unknown with a conviction that felt reckless and somehow destined. Yet the road ahead was not a path at all. It appeared like a rugged mountain of challenges, tall, unexplored, its summits cloaked in fog. I found myself at its foot, empty-handed, lacking any instruments to forge a way forward, without a map to direct my journey, and devoid of a vision of a peak to assure a conclusion. Still, I stood there equipped with an odd, unwavering resolve, prepared to ascend. Returning to reality, challenges confronted me, each increasingly overwhelming. The first issue was fundamental. I lacked a university degree. Pursuing graduate studies in the U.S. was the only viable escape route, a slim connection to a fresh start. But how could I even consider applying without a college diploma? This dilemma tormented me, a puzzle without a solution. The second issue was financial, or rather, the complete absence of it. I had no financial support in the U.S. and no affluent relatives to fund my journey. My personal savings were minuscule, far from sufficient for tuition, much less for living in an unfamiliar country. I was beginning from scratch, a dreamer who faced an uphill battle. The third was the TOEFL exam, a gatekeeper I was woefully unprepared to face. I had a rudimentary grasp of English bits and pieces picked up over time, but it was far from the fluency demanded by an American university. Worse still, I'd never even laid eyes on a TOEFL test. It loomed like a blank wall, its rules and rhythms a mystery I couldn't crack. The fourth was China's political vice, tightening by the day. The Tiananmen crackdown had left its scars, and the U.S. retaliated with sanctions, freezing Sino-American relations in a diplomatic deep freeze. The government's response was swift and unyielding. Party members and officials were barred from traveling abroad for personal reasons. As both a Communist Party member and a government official, I was doubly trapped, my status a shackle I couldn't shed. And the fifth, the greatest enigma of all, the U.S. visa process. Even if I somehow scaled the other walls, this final hurdle towered above them all. Securing a visa felt like chasing a mirage across a scorching desert shimmering in the distance, forever out of reach. One misstep, one bureaucratic whim, and it could vanish entirely. By every rational measure, this was a lost cause. A sane mind would have surrendered then and there. But somehow, I never doubted not for a single fleeting second that I would succeed. I had no evidence, assurances, or logic to support my belief. The odds mocked me, and the world screamed impossibility. And yet deep in my bones, in some primal, unshakable core, I knew. I didn't know how. I couldn't see the steps or trace the path, but I just knew I would make it. If a mountain blocked my way, I would climb it, clawing up its jagged face. If no path existed, I would carve one, tearing through stone with my bare hands if I had to, because in my heart I had already left. My body lingered in China, tethered to its soil, but my soul had taken wing, soaring toward a horizon I couldn't yet see but could feel with every beat of my pulse. When I first considered studying abroad, it seemed like an impossible fantasy, a distant lighthouse flickering on the horizon, unreachable and unreal. Every obstacle imaginable stood in my way as if the entire world had conspired to keep me from setting foot outside China. Yet this notion persisted, unyielding, refusing to fade. It burrowed deep into my mind, taking root like a stubborn weed, growing stronger each day. The mere thought of leaving, of stepping beyond the party's iron grip, was exhilarating. But this wasn't just about escape. It was about something far more significant. It was about education. Going abroad meant entering a university. It meant reclaiming a dream I had long buried. When I was drafted into the Army in 1976, I missed the only 2 university entrance exams after the Cultural Revolution. In China, that meant my future had been sealed. I had lost my only chance at higher education. But beyond China's borders, a second chance was waiting. At the very least, it was a beautiful dream. At the very least, I had become like those poor children from the old society that the Communist Party always spoke of. The ones who couldn't afford school and had to stand outside classroom windows, peeking in longingly at the education they would never have. And now that child was me. Though I had a dreamer's heart, I had a realist's mind. I knew that achieving even a fragment of this dream required a concrete plan, starting from the smallest, most practical steps. The following Sunday, I visited the foreign language bookstore. While browsing the shelves at these bookstores, I found 2 American university guidebooks. I carefully gathered details about universities that seemed approachable, compiling a list of potential schools. From reading these books, I discovered that foreign graduate students at American universities need a minimum TOEFL score of 550. I wasn't sure what a score of 550 represented, Regardless, I made it my first target since it was the standard to meet. After all, wasn't it just about studying? And for now, English was the only aspect I could control. Back home, I immediately filled out applications for the next TOEFL test and registered for the January and May exams to maximize my chances. I was under no illusions about my English skills, which were inadequate. I would have a second shot without delay if I failed the first attempt. I also sent out the application for enrollment at 3 universities. State University of New York at Stony Brook, East Coast. Fort Hays State University in Kansas, Midwest. California State University, Hayward, West Coast. I focused on enrolling for the fall of 1990. My personal battle had commenced with my university applications sent and exam registrations finalized. I was completely immersed in the struggle to pass the TOEFL exam, an intense strategic conflict in which failure was not an option. Now it was war. I required weapons and a boot camp. I was seeking the most comprehensive preparation materials available in Shanghai. I began asking questions and searching for information. Where could I locate the largest collection of past TOEFL exams? After numerous inquiries, I discovered the answer: the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. I called the Academy's office director, an old friend of mine. "Can you provide me with all your past TOEFL exams in your archives?" I inquired. Without a moment's pause, he agreed. Days later, I received 25 full sets of TOEFL exams books, tapes, and practice materials packed into several massive cardboard boxes. It was a gold mine. For the upcoming 6 months, I had a distinct objective: to extract maximum value from this gold mine, hone it, and turn it into a personal reservoir of knowledge. I couldn't leave my job or attend an English training course, as taking time off for studies wasn't an option. Thus, I crafted the sole feasible strategy: unyielding simulation training. I had only one battle to conquer. The TOEFL exam took more than 3 hours. During my first practice test at home, I scored 253. It was disastrous. My English was at a 3rd grade level. Now, I faced the daunting task of advancing to a high school graduate level through self-study in under 6 months. It seemed impossible. Regardless, I kept going. Every evening after work, I would complete a full-length TOEFL simulation test, which became my nightly routine. After my demanding government job, I would return home, lock myself in my small study, a cramped workspace resembling a pigeon cage, and battle my English shortcomings. For 3 hours, I pushed through, eliciting exercises, pressing myself to interpret the swift blur of foreign sounds, grammar tasks, embedding rules into my mind through relentless repetition, reading sections, hurriedly skimming and scanning under tight time limits. I turned down every social gathering, dinner, or event I could afford to miss. My life was reduced to a desk, a lamp, and the unyielding quest for 550. Amidst the fatigue and overwhelming mental strain, I experienced an unusual sensation: exhilaration. For the first time, I was fighting a battle entirely my own. There were no party orders, military commands, or government mandates. This was a battle of personal willpower, a test of discipline and endurance, a challenge that no one had forced upon me, yet one I had chosen to face. And that was what fueled me the most.